The evening was quiet, almost too quiet. The kind of silence that makes you feel like the world has stopped spinning, even though you know it hasn't. 12-year-old Ethan sat at his desk in his small bedroom, doodling superheroes on a piece of paper. His pencil moved quickly, sketching capes and masks with bold lines. Outside, the sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The room was dimly lit by a single lamp, casting soft shadows on the walls. Downstairs, Claire, Ethan's mother, was busy in the kitchen. She hummed a familiar tune as she stirred a pot of soup on the stove. Her movements were calm but deliberate, like they always were when she cooked dinner. But tonight, something felt different. It wasn't just the unusually still air or the way the house creaked faintly in the background. It was her eyes. They darted toward the window every few seconds, scanning the darkening street outside. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached for the salt shaker. For weeks now, Claire had been receiving strange messages. First, it was an unsigned letter slipped under their front door, warning her to be careful. Then came the phone calls. Always. Late at night, always from blocked numbers. A voice would whisper cryptic phrases like, "They're watching," or "You don't have much time." At first, Claire dismissed them as pranks, but the warnings grew more frequent, more urgent. Tonight, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. As she turned off the stove and wiped her hands on a dish towel, a sound outside caught her attention. It was faint, a car engine rumbling softly, but it made her freeze. Peering through the curtains, she saw headlights sweeping across the driveway. A black sedan pulled up to the curb and parked. No one got out. Claire's heart began to race. She glanced at the clock. It was just past 8 p.m., far too late for unexpected visitors. Her mind raced as she weighed her options. Should she call the police? Hide? Or pretend everything was normal? Before she could decide, the car door opened, and two figures stepped out. They wore dark coats and moved with purpose, heading straight for the front door. Panic surged through Claire. She knew she didn't have much time. Without hesitation, she bolted upstairs to Ethan's room. He looked up from his drawing, startled by the sudden intrusion. "Mom, what's wrong?" he asked, noticing the fear etched on her face. Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she grabbed a backpack from the closet and started stuffing it with essentials: clothes, snacks, a flashlight, and a bottle of water. Her hands shook as she worked, but her actions were precise. "Ethan, listen to me," she said urgently, kneeling beside him. "You need to leave. Right now. Don't ask questions, just go." She shoved the backpack into his arms and pulled him toward the window. "Run as fast as you can. Don't stop, no matter what. And whatever you do, don't come back until 3 days have passed, promise me." Tears welled up in Ethan's eyes. "But why, Mom? What's going on?" he pleaded, clutching the backpack tightly. "I'll explain later," Claire whispered, her voice breaking. "Just trust me, okay? I love you so much." Before he could protest further, she pushed open the window and helped him climb out. As Ethan stumbled into the cool night air, he turned back to see his mother standing in the glow of his desk lamp, her face pale and resolute. Behind her, the sound of heavy footsteps echoed up the stairs. Two shadowy figures appeared in the doorway of his room. Claire slammed the window shut and drew the curtains, shielding Ethan from view. Heart pounding, Ethan ran into the darkness, clutching the backpack and trying not to cry. He didn't understand what was happening, but one thing was clear. His life and his mother's would never be the same again. Ethan's feet pounded against the cold, damp ground as he sprinted away from the house, his heart racing faster than his legs. The backpack bounced awkwardly on his shoulders, its weight unfamiliar and unsettling. Every step felt like a betrayal. He wanted to turn back, to run upstairs and hug his mom, to tell her he wouldn't leave no matter what. But her voice echoed in his mind, sharp and desperate. "Run, Ethan, don't stop running until you're safe." Her words pushed him forward, even though every fiber of his being screamed to go back. The night was eerily silent except for the crunch of leaves beneath his sneakers and the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Shadows loomed around him, twisting and stretching in the dim light of the moon. He glanced over his shoulder, half expecting to see someone chasing him, but the street behind him was empty. The black sedan was still parked at the curb, its headlights casting long, ominous beams across the driveway. Ethan shivered, not just from the chill in the air, but from the sinking feeling that something terrible was happening back at the house. As he ran, flashes of his mother's face swirled in his mind, her wide, frightened eyes. The way her hands trembled as she shoved the backpack into his arms. The sound of her voice cracking when she said, "I love you so much." It didn't make sense. His mom was always strong, always the one who kept everything together. She was the person who kissed his scraped knees, helped him with his homework, and made sure there was always hot chocolate on cold nights. What could possibly scare her this much? Ethan slowed down as he reached the edge of the neighborhood, where the houses gave way to open fields and clusters of trees. He ducked behind a large oak tree, catching his breath and trying to think. Where was he supposed to go? His mom had told him to trust no one, not even family or friends. But what did that mean? Was it really possible that someone close to them could be involved in whatever was happening? The thought made his stomach churn. He opened the backpack to see what his mom had packed. There were clothes, a flashlight, a small first aid kit, and a few snacks, granola bars, a bag of chips, and a bottle of water. At the bottom, he found a folded piece of paper. Unfolding it, he saw his mom's neat handwriting. "Stay hidden. Be brave. I'll explain everything soon." Below it, she had drawn a tiny heart. Ethan clutched the note to his chest, tears welling up in his eyes. He missed her already, and the ache of not knowing why she sent him away was almost unbearable. For a moment, he considered going back. Maybe he could sneak into the house through the back door and find her. But then he remembered the two shadowy figures entering the house. Who were they? What did they want? And why had his mom risked everything to send him away? The questions swirled in his mind, leaving him more confused than ever. Reluctantly, Ethan forced himself to keep moving. He wandered deeper into the woods, staying off the main roads and avoiding any signs of people. The darkness surrounded him like a thick blanket, and every sound, the snap of a twig, the hoot of an owl, made him jump. He tried to focus on the things his mom had taught him: how to use the stars to navigate, how to listen for water, how to stay calm in scary situations. But none of those lessons prepared him for this. Finally, exhausted and overwhelmed, Ethan found a spot beneath a cluster of bushes. He curled up on the soft earth, wrapping his arms around himself to ward off the cold. The flashlight lay beside him, its beam turned off to save the batteries. As he stared up at the sky dotted with twinkling stars, he whispered a promise to himself and to his mom. "I'll be brave," he said softly, his voice barely audible over the rustling leaves. "I'll do what you told me to do. And I'll come back for you." With that, Ethan closed his eyes, clutching the note tightly in his hand. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of his mother's smile and the sound of her laughter. But beneath it all was a nagging fear, a fear that when he returned, she might not be there waiting for him. The next 2 days were a blur of fear, hunger, and loneliness for Ethan. The woods became both his refuge and his prison, a place where he could hide but also feel completely isolated. Every rustle of leaves or distant snap of a twig made him jump, convinced that someone or something was following him. He stayed low, sticking to the shadows and avoiding open spaces, just as his mom had taught him during their camping trips. But this wasn't a fun adventure. It was survival, and the weight of it pressed down on him with every passing hour. Ethan's first priority was finding food and water. His mom had packed a few snacks, but they didn't last long. By the second day, his stomach felt hollow, growling loudly enough to scare off a nearby squirrel. He wandered deeper into the forest, searching for a stream or pond. Finally, he stumbled upon a narrow brook bubbling over smooth stones. Kneeling beside it, he cupped his hands and drank greedily, the cold water soothing his parched throat. For a moment, he let himself imagine that everything was okay, that he was just out here exploring and his mom would be waiting at home with hot cocoa when he returned. But reality quickly crashed back in. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and Ethan shivered under the thin jacket his mom had thrown into the backpack. He huddled beneath a cluster of bushes, using the flashlight sparingly to conserve its batteries. Its faint beam illuminated the gnarled roots of trees and the occasional pair of glowing eyes watching him from the darkness. Each time he turned it off, the silence grew heavier, pressing against his ears until he thought he might scream. Sleep came in fits and bursts. Whenever he closed his eyes, memories of his mom flooded his mind. The way she laughed when he told her silly jokes, the way she always knew when he was upset even if he tried to hide it. But those happy thoughts were overshadowed by the image of her face that night. Pale, scared, desperate. Why had she sent him away? Who were those men who came into their house? And why did she tell him not to trust anyone? On the third morning, Ethan woke up stiff and sore, his body protesting against the hard ground. Hunger gnawed at him again, sharp and unrelenting. He realized he couldn't stay in the woods any longer. If he wanted answers, if he wanted to see his mom again, he had to go back. He clutched the note she had written, now crumpled and worn, from being held so tightly. Her words gave him strength. Stay hidden. Be brave. Taking a deep breath, he slung the backpack over his shoulders and began making his way toward home. As he walked, his mind raced with questions. What would he find when he got there? Would his mom be waiting for him, ready to explain everything? Or would the house be empty, the only sign of her presence the belongings she left behind? The thought made his chest tighten, but he pushed it aside. He had promised himself, and her, that he would be brave. By the time he reached the edge of the woods, the sun was setting once more, casting long shadows across the landscape. He paused for a moment, staring at the familiar outline of his neighborhood in the distance. Everything looked the same. The rows of houses, the neatly trimmed lawns, but something felt different. The air seemed heavier, charged with an invisible tension that made his skin prickle. Ethan took a step forward, then another, each movement bringing him closer to the truth. He didn't know what awaited him, but one thing was certain. He couldn't keep running. Not anymore. Whatever had happened to his mom, he needed to face it head on. With trembling hands and a heart full of determination, he began the final stretch toward home, hoping against hope that she would be there waiting for him. Ethan's heart pounded as he stepped out of the woods and onto the quiet street that led to his house. The neighborhood looked eerily unchanged, like a picture frozen in time. The same streetlights flickered softly, casting pools of yellow light on the pavement. The same cars sat parked in driveways, their windows reflecting the dim glow of the evening sky. But something about it all felt wrong, too still, too silent, as if the world was holding its breath. As he approached his house, Ethan's steps grew slower, heavier. His chest tightened with every step closer to the front door. The porch light was off and the curtains were drawn shut, making the house look dark and lifeless. It wasn't supposed to be this way. This was his home, the place where he felt safest, where his mom's laughter filled the air and the smell of her cooking always lingered. Now, it felt alien, almost menacing. He hesitated at the edge of the driveway, staring at the black sedan still parked by the curb. Its presence sent a fresh wave of dread coursing through him. Why was it still here? Who did it belong to? And why hadn't anyone noticed or reported it after 2 days? Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to move forward despite the fear gripping his insides. The front door was slightly ajar, creaking faintly in the breeze. Ethan pushed it open, his breath catching in his throat. The inside of the house was a mess, furniture overturned, drawers pulled out and emptied onto the floor, papers scattered everywhere. It looked like a storm had swept through, leaving chaos in its wake. His mom's favorite vase lay shattered near the couch, its shards glinting under the pale moonlight streaming through the window. "Mom?" Ethan called out, his voice trembling. "Are you here?" There was no answer, only the hollow echo of his own words bouncing back at him. He moved cautiously from room to room, calling her name again and again, but the house remained silent. In the kitchen, the pot of soup she had been cooking that night still sat on the stove, now cold and congealed. A single spoon rested on the counter beside it, untouched. His search led him to her bedroom, the one place he hadn't yet dared to enter. The door was closed, and for a moment he stood frozen, afraid of what he might find on the other side. Summoning every ounce of courage, he turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was just as chaotic as the rest of the house, but amid the disarray something caught his eye. A piece of paper lying on her unmade bed. He picked it up, recognizing his mom's handwriting immediately. The note was short, hurriedly scrawled. "I love you, Ethan. Stay strong. Trust your instincts." Beneath those words, written in bold letters and circled repeatedly, was a single command: run. Ethan's hand shook as he clutched the note to his chest. Tears welled up in his eyes, blurring his vision. She knew they would take her. That much was clear. But why? What did these people want from her? And how could he possibly stay strong when everything around him was falling apart? He sank onto the edge of the bed, clutching the backpack straps tightly. For a few moments he let himself cry, letting the weight of everything crash over him. Then, slowly, he wiped his tears and took a deep breath. His mom had trusted him to be brave, to figure things out. He couldn't give up. Not now, not when she needed him most. Standing up, Ethan scanned the room one last time. Something about the dresser caught his attention. Its bottom drawer was slightly askew, as though it hadn't been closed properly. Curious, he knelt down and tugged it open. Inside, beneath a pile of neatly folded sweaters, was a small wooden box. He opened it carefully, revealing old photographs, newspaper clippings, and documents that seemed important, but confusing. One clipping in particular stood out. It showed a grainy photo of his mom alongside a headline that read, "Local woman accuses prominent organization of corruption." Ethan's stomach churned. Was this what this was all about? Had his mom uncovered something dangerous, something someone didn't want exposed? Clutching the box, Ethan made a decision. He couldn't stay here, not anymore. Whoever had taken his mom was powerful, and they wouldn't stop until they found him too. But he also couldn't run forever. If he wanted answers, if he wanted to save his mom, he had to fight back. And the first step was figuring out exactly who they were. Ethan spent the rest of the night poring over the contents of the wooden box, his mind racing as he tried to piece together the fragments of his mom's secret life. The photographs were old. Some showed Claire smiling brightly at events he didn't recognize, while others captured her standing beside people whose faces seemed vaguely familiar, but unplaceable. The newspaper clippings painted a clearer picture. His mom had been involved in something big, something dangerous. One article mentioned her name alongside accusations of whistleblowing against a powerful organization. Another hinted at threats made against her safety after she spoke out. The documents were harder to decipher, filled with technical jargon and references to names Ethan didn't recognize. But one thing was clear: his mom had been digging into something corrupt, something that someone wanted to keep hidden, and now, because of it, she was gone. As dawn broke, Ethan realized he couldn't do this alone. He needed help, but who could he trust? His mom's warning echoed in his mind. Trust no one. Yet deep down, he knew there had to be someone, somewhere, who might have answers. Someone who could guide him without leading him into more danger. His thoughts turned to Mrs. Harper, the elderly neighbor who lived 2 streets over. She had babysat him when he was younger and always treated him like family. More importantly, she and his mom had been close, at least they used to. For Ethan remembered afternoons spent drinking lemonade on Mrs. Harper's porch, while the 2 women laughed and chatted like old friends. Maybe she knew something about what was going on. With the wooden box tucked securely under his arm, Ethan slipped out of the house and made his way to Mrs. Harper's home. The walk felt longer than usual, each step weighed down by uncertainty. What if she didn't know anything? Worse, what if she was somehow connected to the people who took his mom? When he arrived, the house looked exactly as he remembered it. A cozy little cottage surrounded by flower beds and a white picket fence. He hesitated for a moment before knocking on the door. After a few seconds, Mrs. Harper appeared, her silver hair tied back in a loose bun and her glasses perched on the tip of her nose. Her expression shifted from surprise to concern when she saw Ethan standing there. "Ethan, dear, what are you doing here so early?" she asked, pulling the door open wider. Come in. Come in." Once inside, Ethan struggled to find the right words. How could he explain everything without sounding like he was losing his mind? Finally, he blurted it all out. The strange men, his mom's disappearance, the box of clues he'd found. To his relief, Mrs. Harper listened intently, her brow furrowing deeper with each word. When he finished, she sighed heavily and sank into her armchair. For a long moment, she said nothing, staring at the floor as though lost in thought. Then, finally she spoke. "Your mother came to me once," she began softly. "She didn't tell me much, but she did say she was being watched. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just paranoia. But now—" Her voice trailed off, and she shook her head sadly. Ethan leaned forward eagerly. "Did she mention anyone? Any names or places?" Mrs. Harper hesitated, before nodding slowly. There was one name she kept repeating, the syndicate. She wouldn't say what it meant, but she acted like it was important, dangerous. "The syndicate," Ethan repeated quietly, committing the name to memory. It sounded ominous, like something out of a movie. But this wasn't fiction. It was real, and it had taken his mom. Together they sifted through the contents of the box, searching for any additional clues. Mrs. Harper pointed out details Ethan had missed, a logo on a document, a handwritten note scribbled in the margins of a clipping. Piece by piece, a pattern began to emerge. The syndicate wasn't just some random group. It was an organized network with ties to powerful people. And judging by the evidence, they weren't afraid to silence anyone who got in their way. By the time they finished, Ethan felt both overwhelmed and determined. He thanked Mrs. Harper for her help, promising to keep her updated but also insisting she stay safe. As he walked back toward the woods, clutching the box tightly, he knew what he had to do next. If the syndicate was behind his mom's disappearance, then finding them was the key to bringing her home. But first he needed proof. Something undeniable that would expose their crimes to the world. For the first time since his mom vanished, Ethan felt a flicker of hope. He wasn't just running anymore, he was fighting back. Armed with the clues from the wooden box and Mrs. Harper's cryptic hints, Ethan knew he had to act quickly. The syndicate wasn't just a name. It was a shadowy organization that operated, in secrecy, pulling strings behind the scenes. If they had taken his mom, then they likely wouldn't hesitate to come after him next. But instead of running or hiding, Ethan decided to turn the tables. He needed to find out where they were meeting, what they were planning, and how he could use their own secrets against them. Mrs. Harper had one last piece of advice before Ethan left her house. Be careful who you trust, but don't be afraid to ask questions. She handed him an old library card with a note scribbled on the back, a time and location for something called the Monthly Forum, a gathering she believed was linked to the syndicate. It wasn't much, but it was enough to get started. Ethan spent the next day preparing. Using the supplies left in his backpack, he fashioned a makeshift disguise, an oversized hoodie borrowed from Mrs. Harper's late husband, a pair of dark sunglasses, and a scarf wrapped around his face to conceal his identity. He practiced walking differently, slouching his shoulders and shuffling his feet to appear older than he was. When he looked at himself in the mirror, even he barely recognized the figure staring back. The address on the library card led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was far from any main roads, surrounded by tall weeds and rusted chain-link fences. As dusk fell, cars began arriving, their headlights cutting through the thickening darkness. Men and women dressed in sharp suits climbed out, speaking in hushed tones as they entered the building. Ethan watched from a safe distance, crouched behind a pile of crates, his heart pounding like a drum. He waited until most of the attendees had gone inside before sneaking closer. The warehouse doors were cracked open just enough for him to slip through unnoticed. Inside, the space was dimly lit by flickering fluorescent lights, revealing rows of folding chairs arranged in a semicircle. At the front stood a large projector, screen displaying a logo Ethan recognized from the documents in the wooden box, the same emblem Mrs. Harper had pointed out earlier. Hiding behind a stack of pallets near the back, Ethan strained to hear the conversation. A man in a tailored suit addressed the group, his voice low but commanding. "We've contained the situation with Claire," he said, sending a chill down Ethan's spine. "But her son is still unaccounted for. Find him before he becomes a problem." Ethan clenched his fists, fighting the urge to burst out of his hiding spot and demand answers. Instead, he focused on listening intently, memorizing every detail. They spoke about operations, code names, and locations. Enough information to confirm that the syndicate was involved in illegal activities ranging from fraud to smuggling. Most importantly, they mentioned holding Claire captive in another facility, though they didn't specify where. Suddenly, the sound of footsteps echoed nearby. Someone was patrolling the area, checking for intruders. Ethan held his breath, pressing himself flat against the cold concrete floor. His mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. Then inspiration struck. He grabbed a loose bolt from the ground and tossed it toward the far corner of the room. The metallic clatter drew the guard's attention, giving Ethan just enough time to slip out unnoticed. Once outside, he ran as fast as he could, putting as much distance between himself and the warehouse as possible. When he finally stopped to catch his breath, his head swirled with everything he'd learned. His mom was alive, but she was being held somewhere else. And if he wanted to save her, he'd need to gather more evidence and allies. For the first time since this nightmare began, Ethan felt a spark of determination. He wasn't just a scared kid anymore. He was a step closer to uncovering the truth. And he wasn't going to stop until his mom was safe. The night before the meeting at the abandoned factory, Ethan barely slept. His mind raced with plans and worst-case scenarios. He knew this was his best chance to find his mom, but it could also be a trap. If the syndicate discovered him snooping around, they wouldn't hesitate to silence him permanently. Still, he couldn't let fear stop him. This wasn't just about saving Claire anymore. It was about uncovering the truth and exposing the people who thought they were untouchable. Early the next morning, Ethan packed everything he might need: the wooden box of clues, a small pocket knife Mrs. Harper had given him for protection, and the flashlight from his backpack. He dressed in dark clothes to blend into the shadows and covered his face with a hoodie. Before leaving the woods, he whispered a quiet promise to himself. "I'll bring you home, Mom. No matter what." As dusk fell, Ethan made his way toward the factory on the outskirts of town. The building loomed against the horizon, its broken windows like hollow eyes staring into the void. Weeds sprouted through cracks in the concrete driveway, and rusted metal beams jutted out from crumbling walls. It looked like the perfect place for something sinister to happen. Ethan stayed hidden behind a cluster of bushes near the entrance, watching as cars pulled up one by one. Each vehicle carried men and women dressed in suits or tactical gear, their faces grim and focused. They moved with purpose, carrying briefcases and folders that likely contained secrets too dangerous to leave behind. Ethan counted 8 people in total, including the 2 men he'd seen at the coffee shop. Their presence confirmed his suspicions. This was no ordinary meeting. Once everyone had gone inside, Ethan crept closer, sticking to the shadows. The factory's back door was slightly ajar, and he slipped through without making a sound. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint hum of fluorescent lights flickering overhead. He pressed himself against the wall, listening intently. Voices echoed from a nearby room, muffled but urgent. "I told you we should have dealt with her sooner," one voice growled. "Now she's caused too much trouble." "And the kid?" another asked sharply. "What about him?" "He doesn't know anything. Just a scared boy running around blindly. Once we finish here, we'll take care of both of them, for good." Ethan's blood ran cold. They were talking about him and his mom. His hands trembled, but he forced himself to stay calm. He had to keep moving, had to find where they were holding her. Peering around the corner, He spotted a staircase leading down to what looked like a basement. The voices were coming from below. Carefully, he descended the steps, each creak of the old wood threatening to give him away. At the bottom, he found a long corridor lined with locked doors. One of them had light spilling out from underneath it. He pressed his ear to the door and heard his mother's voice, weak but defiant. "You won't get away with this," she said. "Someone will stop you." "Shut up," a man snapped. "No one even knows you're here." Ethan's heart soared. She was alive. But how could he get her out? There were too many of them, and he was just one kid. Then he remembered something Mrs. Harper had said. Sometimes the smallest actions can cause the biggest disruptions. Thinking quickly, Ethan grabbed a loose pipe lying on the floor and used it to bang loudly on the opposite end of the hallway. The noise echoed through the basement, startling the group inside the room. Shouts erupted as several pairs of footsteps rushed toward the commotion. Taking advantage of the distraction, Ethan darted to the door where his mom was being held. Using the pocket knife, he pried at the lock until it finally gave way. When he pushed the door open, Claire looked up, her face pale but filled with relief. "Ethan," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. "What are you doing here?" "No." "Time to explain," he said, helping her to her feet. "We have to go now." They ran together, retracing Ethan's steps back toward the stairs. Behind them, angry shouts grew louder as the syndicate realized they'd been tricked. Ethan led his mom outside, guiding her into the dense woods where he'd spent the past few days hiding. As they disappeared into the trees, the factory faded into the distance, swallowed by darkness. For the first time in days, Ethan allowed himself to feel a glimmer of hope. They weren't safe yet, but they were together again. And that meant everything. Ethan and Claire didn't stop running until they were deep in the woods, far from the factory and the people who wanted to hurt them. The cool night air bit at their skin, but neither of them cared. Ethan's heart was pounding, not just from the sprint, but from the overwhelming relief of having his mom back. She leaned on him as they walked, her legs weak from days of captivity, but her eyes burned with determination. As they settled into a small clearing surrounded by tall trees, Claire turned to Ethan, gripping his shoulders tightly. "You shouldn't have come for me," she said, her voice trembling. "It was too dangerous." "I wasn't going to leave you there," Ethan replied firmly, meeting her gaze. "You did everything to protect me. I wasn't going to let them win." Claire hugged him tightly, tears streaming down her face. For a moment they simply held each other, letting the weight of everything they'd been through sink in. But reality quickly returned. They weren't safe yet. The syndicate would be looking for them, and it was only a matter of time before they figured out Ethan had rescued her. "We need to expose them," Claire said finally, wiping her tears. "They've done too much damage to too many people. If we don't stop them now, they'll keep hurting innocent families like ours." Ethan nodded. He pulled out the wooden box and showed her all the clues he'd gathered, the newspaper clippings, documents, and notes. Claire's eyes widened as she flipped through them. "You found this?" she asked, her voice filled with awe. "Ethan, you're incredible." Together, they pieced together a plan. Claire explained that the syndicate operated in secrecy because their power relied on staying hidden. If they could leak the evidence to the right people, journalists, authorities, anyone willing to listen, they could dismantle the organization once and for all. The next morning, Ethan and Claire made their way to Mrs. Harper's house. She welcomed them with open arms, immediately sensing the urgency in their expressions. Over steaming cups of tea, they laid out their plan. Mrs. Harper promised to help, using her connections to contact trusted reporters and lawyers. "Leave it to me," she said firmly. "You two focus on staying safe." For the next few days, Ethan and Claire stayed hidden, while Mrs. Harper worked tirelessly behind the scenes. She sent copies of the evidence to multiple news outlets, ensuring that even if one ignored the story, others wouldn't. Slowly but surely, whispers of the syndicate began to spread. Reporters started digging deeper, uncovering links between the organization and corrupt officials, illegal deals, and countless lives ruined. One evening, as Ethan and Claire watched the news on Mrs. Harper's old television, a breaking report came on. A team of investigators had raided several locations tied to the syndicate, including the abandoned factory. Dozens of arrests were made, and files detailing their crimes were seized. The anchor described it as one of the largest takedowns of organized crime in recent history. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes as she hugged Ethan close. "You did it," she whispered. "You saved us, and so many others." But Ethan shook his head. "We did it together, Mom. You started this fight and I just finished it." The weeks that followed, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after everything they'd endured. Ethan went back to school, though his classmates noticed a change in him. He seemed older, braver, more confident. Claire, meanwhile, became an advocate for whistleblowers, sharing her story to inspire others to speak out against injustice. Though the scars of their ordeal remained, Ethan and Claire grew closer than ever. Every night, as they sat together, under the stars, Ethan felt grateful, not just for his mom, but for the strength they'd discovered in each other. Together they had faced the darkness and emerged stronger on the other side. And as Ethan drifted off to sleep one peaceful night, he realized something important. Sometimes being brave isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what's right, even when you're terrified.